This is the story of how God turned my laugh of disbelief into eternal joy, showing me that even in the sands of the desert, faith can bloom. There are moments in life when a simple gesture reveals more than we can understand at the moment it happens. My laugh, that brief muffled sound I tried to hide, was a reflection of the unbelief I carried, but also the starting point for something that would change my life forever. The desert was relentless that day. The wind blew hot, carrying grains of sand that seemed to find every crack in our clothes and skin. Sitting under the shade of a date palm, I looked out at the endless horizon, where the sky and earth seemed to meet. The vastness before me reflected my heart, empty, tired, worn out by the years. Abraham was in sight, organizing the servants. Even from a distance, his posture radiated confidence. It was something I admired, but it also filled me with questions. How could he maintain such firm faith in the face of so much silence from God? I watched him and wondered if, somewhere in his heart, he too didn't have doubts. "You're deep in thought again," Abraham said, walking over with calm steps. He sat beside me, the heat not seeming to bother him. "What else do I have but to think?" I replied, trying to hide the melancholy in my voice. Abraham looked at me with an understanding smile. He took my hand, his wrinkles telling the stories of a long life full of challenges. "God hasn't forgotten us, Sara. He promised, and he will fulfill it. What if we misunderstood? What if the promise wasn't for us?" My voice came out more bitter than I intended. He was unshaken. "God doesn't lie. Even when everything seems impossible, he is working. We need to trust." I wanted to believe as he believed. But how could I, when time seemed like an enemy taking everything from me? Later that day, something unexpected happened. I was in the tent, overseeing the servants, when I heard Abraham call out, "Quick, Sara. Prepare bread and fresh meat. We have guests." I looked out of the tent opening and saw 3 men approaching. There was something strange about them, something not easily explained. They were not ordinary travelers. There was a dignity, a presence that unsettled me. As I kneaded the dough, I overheard fragments of the conversation. Abraham treated them with an uncommon reverence, and they spoke in a calm manner, as if every word was carefully chosen. Then, I heard my name. "Where is Sara, your wife?" My heart stopped. How did they know my name? "She's in the tent," Abraham replied. The next phrase changed everything. "Next year at this time, she will have a son." My hand froze in the dough. A son? At my age? Before I could contain myself, a laugh escaped. It was a low laugh, almost bitter, the result of years of waiting and disappointment. But then, one of the voices asked, "Why did Sara laugh? Is there anything impossible for God?" My heart raced. I immediately denied it. I didn't laugh. "Yes, you did," he replied calmly, but his words were like arrows piercing my soul. That night was endless. The sky was full of stars as always, but they seemed farther away than ever. Lying next to Abraham, I listened to his steady breathing, while my mind was fixed on that question, is anything impossible for God? I silently got up and walked to a small rise near the camp. The sand was cold beneath my feet, and the night wind was gentle, but it didn't bring me comfort. I looked up at the sky, searching for answers among the stars. Why did I laugh? I murmured to myself. It was obvious. I laughed because the promise seemed absurd. Because it was easier to doubt than to risk believing again. Because I feared that if I allowed hope, it would crush me with another disappointment. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears. God, if you really are who Abraham believes you are, why did you wait so long? Why did you let me carry this emptiness for so many years? My prayer was a whisper, a mix of pain and surrender. There was no answer, no sign. But somehow, I felt a small flame of peace amidst my darkness. When I returned to the tent, Abraham was awake. He looked at me with concern. Are you all right? I don't know, I confessed. But maybe I want to try believing. Abraham smiled, pulling me close. That's all God asks of us, Sara. Just a heart willing to trust. In the days that followed, I began to notice small signs of God's faithfulness around us. The sky dawned as bright as always, but now I saw it as a reminder that God sustains all things. One afternoon, while supervising the servants, I once again overheard the whispers. Does she still believe? Rebecca whispered, unaware that I was nearby. I slowly approached, and the other women fell silent. Yes, I said firmly. Because God is greater than my doubts. Rebecca looked at me in surprise, but I also noticed admiration in her gaze. And in that moment, I realized something that brought me peace. My journey of faith was not just about me. It was about being a witness to everyone around me. The days seemed to drag on like the hot desert wind, slow and relentless. Each dawn was a reminder of time passing by, seemingly without change. I wanted to believe, but with each prolonged silence, doubts would return like old acquaintances. I began to occupy myself more intensely with daily tasks. I oversaw the servants, organized supplies, and checked the grazing of the animals. Keeping busy was a way to push away the thoughts that insisted on returning. What if God doesn't fulfill his promise? What if this wasn't meant for me? But the murmurs around me didn't stop. Despite Abraham being respected as the leader, the servants and even the neighbors in the camp spoke about the impossibility of me having a child. One afternoon, while I was arranging the water jars, I overheard a conversation. Does she still hope? After all these years? If it were meant to happen, it would have already. Rebecca, who had always seemed hesitant with me, looked at me at that moment, her eyes wide when she realized I had heard. The other women fell silent, but the hurt had already been planted. That night, I sat beside Abraham as he gazed at the stars. I needed to know. Do you never think that maybe God has forgotten about us? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his expression calm and confident, but filled with tenderness. Yes, I do think about it, he admitted. But when that thought comes, I look at the sky and remember the promises he has already fulfilled. God never lies, Sara. He didn't bring us this far to abandon us. What if it's too late? What if time has already stolen my chance? Abraham sighed, holding my hand. Time is different for God. He is the creator of time, and nothing is impossible for him. Those words stayed with me. They were simple, but they carried a truth I still couldn't fully grasp. That same night, after Abraham fell asleep, I got up and walked alone through the camp. The sky was clearer than ever, the stars so numerous it was impossible not to marvel. I remembered the words God had said to Abraham, "Look at the sky and count the stars if you can. So shall your descendants be." But I still wondered, did this promise really include me? I sat under the date palm where I had cried so many times and looked at the dark horizon. There, I did something I hadn't done in years. I spoke to God. I laughed, I confessed, my voice broken. I laughed because I'm afraid. Because I don't believe I can be part of something so grand. But if you really are who you promised to be, show me. Help me trust, even if I don't understand. The wind blew softly, swaying the trees' leaves, but no sign came. Only silence. And yet, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, I began to notice God's faithfulness in small things. The dawn that never failed, the supplies that never ran out, the strength that continued to sustain me. It wasn't the fulfillment of the promise yet, but it was evidence that God was present. One afternoon, while resting in the shade of the tent, Rebecca approached. She seemed more hesitant than usual, holding a water jug. "Lady Sara," she began, her voice almost shy, I wanted to apologize for what I said. I shouldn't have doubted something that God has promised." I looked at her in surprise, but also with compassion. "We all doubt, Rebecca," I said. "Even I do. But God is greater than our doubts." She smiled timidly, and in that moment, I realized that my journey of faith was impacting more than just my own life. One night, while Abraham and I were together, he pointed to the sky. "Look, Sara. The stars are still there as always. They are a reminder that God never fails." I looked up, trying to imagine what Abraham saw. The stars were countless, just like the doubts I carried. But for the first time, I felt a spark of something new, hope. "You know, Abraham," I began, my voice hesitant, "maybe God is just waiting for the right moment." He smiled, holding my hand. "I believe that, Sara. I've always believed." And in that moment, I decided that maybe I could believe too. It was a morning like any other. I was kneading the flour for the bread when I felt something different. It wasn't fatigue or pain, but a sensation I couldn't describe. I stopped for a moment, holding on to the edge of the table. My heart raced, and for an instant I wondered, could this be what I think it is? In the following days, the sensation lingered, and other changes began to emerge. My body, which for so many years had felt empty and lifeless, now seemed to be filled with something inexplicable. It was as if the promise was finally beginning to take shape. But with this new hope came fear. What if I'm wrong? What if Abraham believes and then is disappointed? What if I am disappointed again? For weeks, I kept these thoughts to myself, unable to share them even with him. It was on a starry night, while Abraham was sitting by the fire, that I finally gathered the courage. I approached him, hesitantly, holding the edge of my cloak. He looked at me, and the warmth of the fire reflected in his eyes, filled with curiosity. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice wavering. "Of course, Sara," he replied, with the calm and encouraging tone I knew so well. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. Something is changing in me. I think it's happening." Abraham's eyes widened, and for a moment, he was silent, as if processing my words. Then, a smile began to form, and he laughed, a pure and joyful laugh. "God is faithful," he exclaimed, raising his hands to the sky. "Thank you, Lord, for fulfilling your promise." I felt a mix of relief and fear. His joy was contagious, but a part of me still feared that something could go wrong. The following months brought confirmations that could no longer be denied. My womb began to grow, and the movement within me was a constant reminder that God's promise was being fulfilled. The servants, who had once whispered about me, now came with looks of admiration. Rebecca, who had doubted so many times, approached one day while I rested under the date palm. "Lady Sara," she began hesitantly, "is it true? What they're saying? That you're pregnant?" I looked at her, smiling, and touched my belly. "Yes, Rebecca. God has done the impossible." She nodded, but her expression still carried a mixture of awe and admiration. Labor began in the middle of the night. A deep pain, like waves that came and went, overtook me. At first, I tried to endure in silence, but soon it was clear that the moment had arrived. Abraham, visibly nervous, called for the midwives and was sent outside the tent. I could hear him praying aloud, his words full of fervor and confidence. "Lord, sustain her. Lord, fulfill what you have promised." Inside the tent, the midwives worked quickly, bringing towels and water. Each contraction felt like a battle, and the pain was greater than anything I had ever felt. "Almost there, Lady Sara," one of the midwives said, trying to encourage me. I closed my eyes, gripping the fabric of the bed tightly. I remembered the words of the messenger, "Is anything impossible for God?" With one final effort, I heard the most wonderful sound of my life, the cry of a baby. The midwives carefully wrapped him and placed him in my arms. He was perfect. His eyes were closed, but his little hands moved gently, as if he was already connecting to the world around him. Abraham entered the tent, his tears reflecting the light of the lanterns. He knelt beside me, gripping my hand tightly. "Sara, God has done the impossible," he said, his voice choked with emotion. I looked at the baby and smiled, a laugh that came from the depth of my soul. "He shall be called Isaac," I declared, my voice firm. Because God turned our laugh of doubt into a laugh of joy. The whole camp celebrated. There were laughs, songs, and prayers. Isaac was more than just a baby, he was a living symbol of God's faithfulness. But it was in the stillness of the night, when everything was silent, that I felt the true weight of what had happened. I held Isaac in my arms, watching him sleep, and thought about all the years of waiting, the tears, the doubts. "Thank you, Lord," I whispered, my tears wetting his little face. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I doubted." The first few months after Isaac's birth were a mix of exhaustion and pure joy. The sound of his cries in the early morning, the warmth of his tiny body in my arms, and his innocent laughter filled our tent with life. Every moment with him was a reminder that God had done the impossible. But along with the joy came the weight of responsibility. Isaac wasn't just my child, he was the fulfillment of the promise. Every step he took toward the future seemed marked by something grand, something beyond what Abraham or I could fully understand. One afternoon, while he played with a smooth stone near the tent, he asked, "Mother, why did God wait so long to give me to you?" I looked at him, surprised by the question coming from someone so young. I held his small hands and answered softly, "Because he wanted us to learn to trust, Isaac. He wanted to show us that nothing is impossible for him, not even waiting." Isaac nodded, as if he understood more than he should for his age. His early wisdom moved me, and I realized he already carried the weight of a greater purpose. As Isaac grew, his presence in the camp became a symbol of God's faithfulness. The servants, who had once doubted, now treated him with reverence. Even Rebecca, who had so often shown skepticism, began to show deep respect. "Lady Sara," she said one morning while helping me prepare the bread, "it's amazing how God fulfilled his promise. Isaac is not just a child. He is something more." I nodded, holding her hands. "Yes, Rebecca. He is the beginning of something great. But never forget, all of this is God's work, not ours." She smiled shyly, but I saw in her eyes that my journey of faith was impacting more lives than I could have imagined. Abraham also dedicated special time to Isaac. He took him for walks under the starry sky and taught him about the promise. "Look at the stars, my son," Abraham would say, pointing to the sky. "God promised our descendants would be as numerous as these. And you are the beginning of that promise." I watched them from a distance, feeling a mix of pride and humility. Isaac wasn't just our son, he was the bridge between our faith and God's plan for future generations. Now, in old age, as I watch Isaac run around the camp, my mind returns to the days of waiting and doubt. I think of the nights when I cried alone, the times I feared God had forgotten me. But now I know that God never forgets. He does not act according to our time or expectations, but he always fulfills what he promises. My journey was not just about receiving a son, it was about learning to trust the God who turns even the smallest laugh of disbelief into a celebration of his faithfulness. One night, while Abraham and I sat by the fire, he asked, "Did you ever imagine we would live through all of this?" "No," I answered, smiling. "But maybe that was what God wanted. For us to learn to believe in the impossible." Abraham held my hand, and we sat in silence for a moment, listening to Isaac's laughter in the distance. I sat under the date palm where I had cried so many times and reflected. I looked at the starry sky, so familiar and at the same time, always surprising. The stars were no longer just points of light, they were reminders of a God who keeps his promises, even when everything seems lost. My story is not just about me or Abraham. It is about a God who uses our weaknesses, our doubts, and even our laughter to accomplish his eternal purpose. I thought of Isaac, what he represented, and I knew that my life had been transformed in a way I could never have imagined. He was more than a child, he was a living testimony that God is faithful. As the wind gently blew, I closed my eyes and murmured, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for turning my laugh into praise." Years later, as I told Isaac the story of his birth, he laughed and said, "So I really am a miracle?" "Yes," I answered, holding his hand. "And you are proof that God does the impossible." And in that moment, I realized that my laugh would continue, not just in me, but in every generation that would come after. God transformed my doubt into faith, and my faith into an eternal legacy. If Sarah's story inspired you to reflect on faith, courage, and perseverance, imagine what you could learn from the extraordinary lives of other women in the Bible. Our ebook, The Virtues of Women in the Bible, Timeless Lessons from Modern Life, dives into the transformative stories of Hannah, Esther, Abigail, Ruth, and Mary, offering insights and reflections that will empower your journey. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the first pinned comment to access this inspiring guide. Let these remarkable women mentor you in living with faith, love, and purpose today.